I've just been watching a short program on Fora TV, which is, well, I won't go into that, but it's an interview with this guy called Rene Girard, who I'd never come across before. I'll put the link in the info box where that is. I'd never come across this guy before. He's a professor at Stanford University, and he's a member of the Académie Française, which is a very prestigious organisation of French intellectuals. There's only 40 members, so you have to be elected to it. So you have to be pretty credible to be in that organisation. So I guess he comes with credibility, even though I've never heard of him. He's written lots of books, apparently. And what he was talking about in this particular kind of interview with him was in a number of sections, and it covers a lot of territory. And I couldn't speak about it all, and only the first bit was relevant, really, where he's talking about desire. But just as a little bit of background, this guy has written specifically on Fraser's The Golden Bough. The Golden Bough is a 19th century book about myth and mythology. And basically what that book, Fraser's Golden Bough, identifies is a common theme that runs through a lot of the world myths, if not all world myths, about the death of the king. That's the kind of idea of it. And it caused a bit of a storm when it was first published, The Golden Bough, because it included Christianity within the kind of panoply of myths that has this theme, this idea of the death of the king and the resurrection of the king, which features as well in all these myths. As I say, that caused a bit of a storm when it was first published, because people in the West like to think that all the rest of the world has myths, whereas we've got the truth. And Fraser is basically saying, no, Christianity is just another continuation of the same myth. Anyhow, this guy, Rene Girard, he wrote extensively on the Golden Bough and identified some particular features of the Christian mythology which distinguished it from other myths. And the latter half of this presentation on Fora TV is about that distinction. But I don't really want to cover that. And if you do choose to look at this presentation, it is interesting. It's quite dense. But if you're allergic to God talk and talk about religion and Christianity specifically, you wouldn't enjoy the second half, because it does go into that quite deeply. But the first part is one of the bit that's more specific, the first 10 minutes. And he's talking about desire. He does eventually lead from this talk about desire into this stuff about the Golden Bough, but it's quite a journey to get there. So I won't make that journey right now. But he's talking about desire, and he's talking about how it operates, or how it operated in the ancient world, and also makes a distinction between desire and appetite. And I think it's a really interesting distinction to make. It's not one I've come across before. He's basically saying, well, two things. He's saying that animals have appetites, whereas humans have desires. Animals have appetites. We might have appetites as well, but animals have appetites. Humans have desires, and desires, he says, are basically memetic. Desires are the copies of other people's desires. The copies of other people's desires. It's a really interesting idea. So he's basically saying, when we desire something, as opposed to just having an appetite for something, when we desire something, what we're doing is we're copying the desire of somebody else. We're observing someone else's desires, and we're internalising it and copying it. So if I can just try and flesh out this distinction myself, if I see an apple on a tree and I'm hungry, that would be an appetite, and I would just go up to the tree and grab it. If, on the other hand, I see someone who is lusting after this apple hanging from this tree, and then I notice the apple myself, then I will probably desire the apple. I might also have an appetite for it, I might also have a hunger for it, but I will probably also internalise this other person's desire for the apple, or this other person's appetite for the apple, and experience that as desire. And I think, just to try to simplify that for myself, really, I think certainly experientially that feels quite intuitively correct. Certainly if I know that somebody else wants something, then that's something that does seem to acquire a greater desirability for myself. Certainly, let's say you're going out with someone, you've got a girlfriend, and it's not going too well maybe, and you think we might I might pack this all in. And then you discover that one of your friends really, really fancies that person. The logical thing to do, I guess, would be to say, oh, well, this person, my friend really fancies this girl, and I'm not too keen, therefore I'll just step aside. But of course we never do that. What happens is that this girl that previously you're a bit lukewarm towards suddenly becomes much more desirable, because you're reflecting and internalising the desire that your friend feels. So you take on that desire. It's an odd phenomenon, that. This idea of picking up the desire of the people around us. What this guy Rene Girard points out as well, of course, is that desire is value-free, in the sense that it's just as easy to internalise what you might call negative or bad desires, to desire bad things, as it is to desire good things. So if the models that we're mimicking, if these people that whose desire we're internalising are desiring bad things that are immoral, then we'll pick up on that immoral desire. And this all happens non-consciously. This isn't something we think about. We don't consciously go, that person's desirous of that, therefore I will be too. It's just completely non-conscious. You just experience it as the feeling, he says. But of course, as I say, so if they're desirous of something that's immoral, or the actions they're thinking of pursuing in order to satisfy that desire are untoward, then we would be likely to follow those actions. I'm trying to find a way to swing this into that discussion about male sexual aggression. I think I'll just leave that on this one and not take it there. But I think the implications should be pretty obvious, I would hope. I mean, he doesn't say this outright, but he does kind of refer it back to prehistoric times. He's saying these things, which he locates, as I say, as the origins of myths, particularly scapegoating myths. I won't have time to go into that right now. He locates those in prehistoric times, the Pliocene or something, I guess. And that, to me, that makes a kind of sense. I think if we're a social species, which of course we are, a social species with a particularly enlarged brain, then it would make good adaptive sense, I think, not just to experience our own appetites, not just to see apples hanging from trees and feel an appetite towards it. It would make sense to recognise the appetites of others, because that would give us a clue as to how to establish values and how to satisfy our own appetites. If I'm kind of lumbering through the Pliocene and I see one of my tribe acting desirous towards some kind of food source, or acting desirous towards some source of sexual fulfillment, it would make sense for me to copy that, because it's quite likely to aid my own survival or to aid my own reproductive capacities. So I would probably start liking apples because my fellow tribe member liked apples. And I would probably start fancying that same member of the opposite sex through an internalisation of my fellow tribe members' attraction to that member of the opposite sex, which I would experience, as I say, not as an appetite, but as desire. Anyhow, it's a very interesting talk. If you get a chance, listen to it. But as I say, the second half is really interesting, but full of God talk, which some people might find difficult.